Hello there, and welcome to Language and Communication. My name is Henrik Böhn, and I'm a lecturer here at Østfold University College, teaching English proficiency, English didactics, and various kinds of communication studies. Today I'm going to introduce to you the course Language and Communication, and I'm going to go through some basic concepts that we will be using in this course. As for the course Language and Communication, it consists of four basic components. The first of these is oral and written communication, which is the component that I will be treating in these videotaped recordings. Then there is a grammar component. There is a phonetics component, and there is an integrated didactics component. And English didactics, of course, related to the planning, carrying out and assessment of a teaching scheme, or how to teach, to put it very simply. Now, I would strongly advise you to have a look at the study plan. Check the study plan carefully. You can find it on the school's web pages, Studieplan. It says something important about the different course elements, the contents of the course. It says something important about the course materials, the books that you are required to read. And it says something about the obligatory requirements, what you have to carry out in order to be able to take the exam. And it says something about the exam. So read this carefully. As for the things that I will be dealing with in these videotaped lectures, I will be treating oral communication, which consists of communication theory. It consists of public speaking theory and practice, and we will look at some practical approaches to how you can improve your oral communication. Then there is a written part where we will be looking at communication theory, which is specifically related to written communication. We will be looking at different genre types, how to write essays and papers and letters, and then we will be looking at some practical approaches to how you can improve your writing. Some advice for the course. We strongly advise you to read the study plan, as I just said. The study plan or the course description, that's important. Hopefully we will be able to put out the term schedule, but it's extremely important that you read the course description, the study plan carefully. Then of course we ask you to check Fronter regularly. We are basing much of this on Fronter, so you have to check Fronter as often as you can. We ask you to read carefully what's on the syllabus. This is a communication course, but you need to know the theory, so it's important that you read the materials there. Also, we encourage you to try to be active, meaning that we want you to read as much as you can, to write as much as you can, and if you have the opportunity to get in touch with fellow students studying the same thing, please do so. It can be very fruitful to work together with somebody. Okay, so much for the practicalities of the course. Now we'll go on to have a look at some of the basic concepts that we will be treating in this course. The first, of course, relates to the concept of communication itself. What is communication? And for those of you who have been studying before, you know that different scholars and theorists, they define words and phrases and concepts in different ways. And the same goes for communication. And I've picked out a few definitions here from Oxford Advanced Learner's Dictionary. The first one says that communication is the act or process of making something known, to inform people, for example. Secondly, communication can be the act or process of passing something on. If you are telling somebody else about what I'm saying today, for example, then you would be passing on information. Thirdly, if I were to meet you face to face, we can exchange information and news and ideas and so on. And fourthly, Oxford Advanced says communication can be to make your ideas or feelings and so on clear to others. Then I've picked out the following definition from Britannica Online, and it says that communication is the exchange of meanings between individuals through a common system of symbols. And now they bring into the aspect the idea of symbols. And if you didn't know English, if you didn't know what these letters what they stand for, and if you don't understand English, you wouldn't be able to understand what we're talking about today. So the idea of symbols is essential for communication. Thirdly, we have picked out a definition which relates to the original meaning, the etymology of the word communication. And communication derives from the Latin word communicare, which means, or one of the meanings is to share with somebody. And this is relevant because quite commonly in communication, we don't know exactly what people mean. We use words and phrases differently and with different meanings. But if we enter into a conversation with somebody, or we start arguing with them, or we have a dialogue, then we can potentially we can find out what the other person means, or what kind of a meaning the other person attaches to the words or phrases we're using. One example can be, last week there was a discussion in the media over the definition of the term ta til etterretning. And there was a professor of psychology who said that this term ta til etterretning typically means to disagree in legal terms. In a courtroom, for example, lawyers would typically say this means to disagree. So when a lawyer says jeg tar rettens kjennelse til etterretning, it will typically mean that the lawyer disagrees with the sentence. But then the professor, she went on to say that there were a couple of psychiatrists who used this term with a different meaning. They used the term ta til etterretning, which in English would translate into note, for example, to note. These two psychiatrists would use the word to mean, well, I hear what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, and I'm thinking about what you're saying. So it does not mean to disagree. But the point about this example is to show that different people have different meanings about things, and when they start discussing them openly, they may come to a common understanding, a shared understanding of what the terms mean. And this is why some communication scholars, they talk about the negotiation of meaning. They talk about communication as negotiating meaning. If we can enter into a discussion, we can start negotiating the meaning of different words and phrases. Now, in communication, I would say that there are three overarching general principles that must be taken into consideration if we want to communicate in a professional way. the first one of these relates to the fact that you need to think about why you are communicating. What is the objective? Do I want to inform people? Do I want to persuade people? Do I want to entertain people? Do I want to socialize with them? Or what do I want to do? And sometimes it's easy to get upset in a communication situation. But then one should think twice, especially if you want to persuade people. If the objective is to persuade people, you must think carefully. What is the best strategy to choose? And if you get upset, sometimes you may say things that you regret later, and which would affect your ability to persuade people. So the communication objectives are very important. Secondly, you need to think about who you are communicating with. You need to consider the recipient. And therefore some communication scholars say that you should design your communication according to the recipient. So the communication should have a recipient design. The Romans, they talked about the same thing 2,000 years ago, discussing or treating the concept of decorum. Decorum, which means to fit your subject matter to the audience. And this is recipient design put in a different way. Thirdly, you need to think about the context. What is the context? Is it early in the morning? Is it late in the evening? Is it winter? Is it summer? Where is this communication taking place? This may affect the communication quite seriously. Now, we're going to have a look at two scholars on the syllabus, Kitty Locker and Steve Kaczmarek, who have developed these three principles into an acronym, which they call PABOK. An acronym just means that there is a word, the word PABOK, which stands for something. And PABOK stands for then. The P stands for purpose. And this is basically the same as objectives that we talked about here. So P stands for purpose. What is the purpose of this communication situation? What do we want to achieve? Do we want to persuade people, entertain, inform, socialize, or perhaps all at the same time? Secondly, who is my audience? Who is it that I'm communicating with? Am I talking to children? Am I talking to old people? Am I talking to educated people or uneducated people or whatever? And then they say, on the basis of the purpose and the audience, you need to think about what information to include or what information to not include. Perhaps there is information that I should leave out now. And then they say, very often listeners or readers, they will be thinking, what can I get out of this situation? What can I get out of this communication situation? What is the benefit for me in this communication situation? And consequently, Locker and Kaczmarek say, you should try to think in advance of what is it that the listener or reader would want to get out of the situation. And conversely, what is the listener or reader's objections? I'm quite sure that there may be listeners out there now who have objections to my presentation today, to the words I'm using, to the way I'm speaking, to my PowerPoint slides, different kinds of objections that they may have. And now, it is of course impossible to know all kinds of benefits and objections that readers or listeners may be thinking about. But it is a good idea to try to anticipate as well as you can how will I come across. And lastly, Locker and Kaczmarek, they also talk about the context. You need to think about the context, the situation, the surroundings. how can this influence the communication situation? Now, one of the purposes of this course is to make you more conscious of communication, to raise your awareness to communication and aspects that influence communication. And therefore, it's very often useful to use models, theoretical models, as a background for reflection. How we can use models to reflect on aspects that influence communication. And I'll give you 2 models today. The first one is the process model, and the second one is the semiotic model. There are, of course, other models as well, but we'll just treat these 2 in this course, as this is an introductory course to communication. Well, the first model I'm quite sure that you've seen before. This has become a bit of a cliche. Some people say that this is not a very useful model for thinking about communication. However, I think it has some advantages, and I'll show you in a minute. This, of course, has to do with the fact that, in a communication situation, there is very often a sender, as in this case now, would be me, sending a message about communication through a channel, and channel means that it's either written or oral. And in this case, it is both. Both talking to you, and I'm using PowerPoint slides with written text on them to communicate my message through to you. And then sometimes the receiver may be able to give feedback, and sometimes, as in this case, you won't. At least you won't be able to give immediate feedback. It may be that you can contact me later, and please do so if you have concrete feedback and criticism. I'd be happy to receive that. And this then will be feedback back to the sender, so that the sender can adjust his communication. Now, one of the advantages of this is that it makes us conscious, for example, of channel. In a communication situation, I should be thinking about this, or it may be useful to think about this. For example, if I am to communicate something important to my superior, for example, my dean here at the college, then I could be talking to him in person. I could phone him up. I can send him an email, or I can contact him in other ways. But what kind of channel should I use? Well, it depends on the purpose. If the purpose is to establish good contact and to have a more intimate conversation, then I should probably go and see him in person. If, however, I need to document the fact that I have been communicating with him, then it would probably be better to send him an email, because then I can go back later, half a year later, I can say, yes, I have talked to you about this, or I sent you an email. Look, here is the email to prove it. And then I would have documentation. So it depends on the situation. But this then makes me able to think about this. And also in terms of feedback right now, for example, I need to take into consideration that we're not face-to-face and you can't ask me questions. So I probably need to slow down, more so than I would in a natural lecture, and so on and so forth. But some people say that this model is too static and it's too much focused on the sender. So they say that sort of everything boils down to the sender's ability to communicate. And if the receiver doesn't understand, well, then it's the sender's fault. And this could be problematic, because there is a lot of research showing that very much communication is down to the receiver's interpretation, how the receiver interprets the communication. And then we'll go on to the semiotic model. But before I do so, I would like to tell you a little story. 100 years ago, there was a Norwegian teacher who got a position as a teacher in the little rural village of Rømskog, which is a fairly remote little place in northeastern Østfold, the county of Østfold. He was coming from the western part of the country, coming by train to Mysen railway station, and from there on he had to go by a horse-drawn carriage to Rømskog. And he was met there on Mysen railway station by a coachman who was going to take him by horse and carriage to Rømskog. So he asked the teacher asked the coachman, how far is it to Rømskog? And the coachman said, yeah, it's about a 2-hour drive. We're going to pass a mountain, he said. We're going over a mountain. And the teacher said, okay, that's fine. And off they went. And then after an hour and a half, the teacher asked the coachman, when will we be coming to this mountain? And the coachman said, oh, we're well beyond the mountain. We have passed the mountain. But then the teacher protested, no, we have not. We have not passed any mountain. And this, of course, is a story illustrating a person coming from a part of the country where they're used to fairly high mountains in the western part of Norway, ranging 2,000 meters up into the sky. Whereas if you come to Østfold, I think the highest point is about 325 meters above sea level or something. So the idea of a mountain, what is a mountain? This can be different, and this is where the semiotic model comes in. What is a mountain? Here we have an example of a mountain, and in the semiotic model, they say that we need to distinguish between the ideas we have in our minds. I may have an idea of a mountain in my mind, and if you close your eyes, you will have ideas of mountains also, and this will be the sort of the sense form of it. And then this sense form can have different realizations. In Norwegian, it will have the realization. In English, it will have the realization mountain, written like this. In Norwegian, it will be written like this and pronounced fjell. In Germany, it would be pronounced Gebirge, and so on. So this means that the idea of the mountain that we have in our minds have different realizations in different languages. And they may refer to different things in the real world. I don't remember if this is Mount Everest. I think it may be so, but it doesn't really matter. But it goes to show that we have different ideas in our minds and that they have different realizations in the language and in the real world. A similar story relates to when I picked up 2 Dutch students at Gardermoen Airport and took them to Halden for the first time, and they came to Halden and they looked at the fortress that we had down here, and they said, "Oh, look at the fortress on the mountain." And I disagreed and I said, "Well, it's not a mountain, is it? It's more of a hill." But then, this is the question again: what is a mountain? What is a hill? What is the difference between a mountain and a hill? Where can we draw the line? This is a matter of then back to what we talked about, negotiating meaning. We can negotiate the meaning. We can say, okay, this is a mountain to you, but to me it's a hill. And we can come to an agreement there, hopefully. Okay, so much for the 2 communication models. We go on then to public speaking, or how to give presentations. And we will do this by introducing rhetoric, which has been a field of study since antiquity. And this is an illustration of the Greek orator Demosthenes. Demosthenes, he was, according to legend, he was a Greek orator who used to practice speaking down on the beach in the storm with pebbles in his mouth. And of course, if you want to communicate well as an orator, you need to speak clearly, And in those days, without public address systems and microphones and so on, you also had to speak very loudly. So he was practicing in the storm, speaking with pebbles in his mouth. Okay, so this introduces classical rhetoric from antiquity. And Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher, he said about rhetoric, that rhetoric is the art of persuasion, how to persuade people. Another definition of rhetoric is to say that it is the art of speaking in public. A third definition is to say that rhetoric is the principles of training communicators. And fourthly, rhetoric has been defined as the study of eloquence, how we can speak eloquently in a sophisticated and varied, beautiful way. But rhetoric can also mean words with no meaning, just words used to fool people. He's just using a lot of rhetoric. It's just nonsensical words. Now, rhetoric goes back to Syracuse, which was Sicily, in the 5th century before the birth of Christ. And in this time, there were a group of dispossessed landowners. Dispossessed landowners, meaning people who had lost their land, and they were allowed to get their land back, but they had to present their case before a democratic tribunal. And if they presented their material well, if they presented their case well, they would get the opportunity to get their land back. So what they did was to hire a lot of philosophers, or some of them, they hired philosophers who were good at speaking and good at persuading to help them speak their case, or help them improve so that they could speak their case. So the essence of this was, of course, that it had to do with persuasion. Rhetoric was intended to persuade. And Aristotle, he elaborated on this and said that basically, if you want to persuade people, there are 3 different ways of doing so. First of all, you can use what are called logos, or logics. You can try to appeal to people's reason. Now, if I want to persuade you to read the material on your syllabus, I could say to you, studies have shown that students who read carefully, they do well at the oral exam, or do well at the exam. And then I'm trying to appeal to your reason. You want to do well at the exam, so you should read the materials on the syllabus. That's logical. That's a rational argument. Conversely, I could try to appeal to your pathos. That would be appeal based on emotions. If I want to raise money for starving children, I could show you a picture of a starving child, and that would be appeal based on emotion. Look, it's a starving child. I'm trying to raise money for starving children. Give generously. Thirdly, Aristotle says there is appeal based on the character of the speaker, what he calls ethos. And in my interpretation, this means that whenever you speak in public, whenever you give a presentation, you will be judged not only on the content, but you will also be judged according to how you addressed, the words you're using, how you put these words together, your non-verbal communication, your body language, for example. All these things are at play in the communication situation. And these are some of the things that we will be looking more closely at in this course. But for now, I think that is sufficient as an introduction to the course and to oral communication and to public speaking.